All right, so we are rolling. I'm going to do my...
All right. Okay, so we're going to just start with kind of introducing yourself. So, you know, who you are, where you're working, currently what your research projects are, just kind of an introduction as you want it to be.
Okay, so I'm Elizabeth Johnson, and I'm professor here at Fordham University. And my research interest in general is theology, systematic theology. Currently, I am working on an anthology, pulling together essays to be called in general, Jesus Christ in Women's Voices, a global conversation. So trying for representation from each continent, but also common themes and so on. It's to fill a gap in the literature, especially for use in classrooms. Mm-hmm. So that's, at the moment, what I'm doing.
Okay. Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. So a lot of the early experiences we want to focus on gender and things like that. So what were your earliest experiences of gender? Do you have kind of formative memories?
Can I ask a question? I know that.
Yeah.
Do you mean when I was a kid or when I was like in theology? What are you
starting from when you were a kid, and then maybe how that was different from once you got into theology, or.
Right. When I was a child, I grew up in Brooklyn near the Narrows, which is the entrance to New York Harbor, and all of the ships would come in from around the world, and little tugboats would pull them into their berths, and I loved watching those little tugboats. And so one of the first things I ever wanted to be when I grew up was a tugboat driver, okay? And I was told girls can't do that, you know? And then when I was able to go to the airport, my dad was a safety inspector for American Airlines. I wanted to be an airline pilot. And I was told girls can't do that. So there's all these interesting things that girls couldn't do. I suppose that's one of my first memories of gender, you know.
What about when you said you had mentioned once you got into theology?
Right. Well, I went to study theology in 1977, and where I went was Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and they had not admitted lay people up until then, till I went. So therefore, obviously, no women. So in most of my classes, I was the only woman. For all of my professors were men. And we never read a woman in any class. My comprehensive exams, there were no women on the bibliographies. And doing dissertation, I mean, there were just no women in the mix. Mm-hmm. And that's when it really began to hit me, because I was loving the theology I was learning, but there was this feeling in me, like, where are the women? Not by way of silencing the men, but like there was just this entire gap. So it became a very strong awareness. The more I studied, the more that theology in the Western Church, and that was what we were studying, but obviously also in the Eastern, was a male endeavor for almost all of its history until recently.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really interesting. So growing up, kind of sticking with the earlier experiences, what were some early experiences of theology or the divine? So as a child, were you drawn to the church? Were you not? What did you say?
I was very drawn to the church as a child. Mm-hmm. What I loved about it was the beauty. And being a Catholic, there was a lot of incense, many flowers and processions, lots of candles and music, and it was just a place of beauty was the church, and the ritual. So I loved all that. Yes, I was attracted to that greatly. I also, being in Brooklyn, we're in the city, but we did have a park down by the harbor, and I do love outdoors. I love the nature. I love trees and the changing of the seasons, and had the experience of the divine in that way also.
I'm gonna add that it's not usable.
Oh no. I just, it's one of those things where.
But going forward, you want.
Yeah, if I can fix it, why not?
Right.
All right, I'm gonna do my clap, and we're ready.
Okay. So kind of keeping with the earlier experiences, when did you become a sister? So was there something that called you to that particularly?
Well, it was. not that unusual to be a sister in the years when I was growing up. And what attracted me to it was really the sense of that you could give your life to God and love God and do so directly and use all your energies for people in need. That attracted me very much.
So then you went to Catholic U in 1977.
Right.
So what called you to the university side of this?
It was very pragmatic. My religious order runs a college, and they needed people for the theology department. And so that was plan A, was go and get your degree, come back and teach in the college, you know. And then all kinds of other developments intervened, and life took over. And when I finished at Catholic University, the faculty there hired me into the faculty, and I was the first woman on that faculty in theology. And that became the decision, should I come back to New York and, you know, go back to the college or stay at the Catholic U and become more of a research scholar rather than a college teacher. You know, those were the options.
So which do you think you took with that?
So I stayed at Catholic U and became a research scholar. Yeah.
All right. So moving into the career path, so how, you mentioned that there were some events that happened during your studies that pulled you, that gave you those two paths. So can you talk a little bit about how did your career path unfold?
Right, so after I became a faculty member, I was now the first woman and the only woman again on this faculty at Catholic University. I knew that the standard for tenure was very high. There are a lot of great publishing scholars there. And so I bent my efforts strongly toward, as everyone does who's on a tenure track position. And it was particularly fraught because of my gender when it came up time for tenure. So I did receive the vote of the faculty for tenure, but my case was held up by the Archbishop. This is a pontifical university, because of an essay I had written on feminist theology. And so the Vatican got involved. I had to answer a whole series of questions, first in writing, then in person, and so on. So by the time I got tenure, it was well into the year of grace. If you don't get tenure, you have a year before you have to leave, so you can look for someone. But that, I really felt I was finished, you know, as a research scholar there. But in the end, I did get tenure. And the experience of that, I think, more than anything, awakened me to the power of patriarchy in the church and the threat that anyone is who makes, or was at that time, who makes a statement that somehow challenges or goes up against or shows even a different way of thinking than the standard, male-oriented pattern. I don't think I was ever aware of it before, but it was the injustice of that tenure battle, which was ideological. It wasn't based on merit. That put that, very clearly before me. Yeah.
So during that process, it seems like that would have been so draining. Who were some support systems for you during that process?
Well, I have wonderful colleagues there, the men on the faculty. And if I may mention Francis Schussler Fiorenza, if I may also mention people like Charlie Curran and David Power. I would have to name almost everyone. They were so supportive and helping me answer the written questions, being my advisors for the oral interrogation and so on. But in addition to the core faculty there, then my own family, my own religious order, friends, and by this time many Catholic theologians from around the country, because I had been working and moving in professional circles by that time for a number of years. So I would say almost every significant relationship in my life was supportive.
What year was that?
That was 1986.
So during that, what, other than the support systems you had, were there any inner kind of drivings that kept you keeping going through that process? What were your mantras during that time, would you say?
I'm not going to let you drive me away. that would be to give in too easily. I think it was being, someone said to me, "You're a kid from Brooklyn and you're a street fighter and you know how to do this." It was the feeling of, this is unfair, so I'm going to hold my ground and beat this. And it was the sense of resistance to this male overwhelming power that I just didn't want it to win. Now, if you say a mantra, basically it was basically, I'll be damned if I'm gonna let you drive me out. But so it was that sort of stubborn feeling, because one of the options, and I did consider it, was simply to resign. And if I resigned, then the whole thing would be over. But patriarchy would have won in the church. And many people were saying to me, "Don't resign, like stay in the fight. This is important for all of us." So there was a whole lot of support even in that decision making. Yeah. But basically it was my stubbornness.
It comes down to just being stubborn.
Yes.
That's great.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
on that?
yeah.
Do you think, was there a sense of like your theology that was also driving you? Like, did it feel like a faith commitment to stay in it, or?
It felt very much like a faith commitment to stay in the fight. It felt like I'm just one woman and I'm just on this one faculty in this one university. But what I'm going through is going on everywhere, in a whole variety of ways, in all different countries. And it felt important for the sake of women to stay in and fight the fight. And not just that in a sense of a cause, but deeply I felt called as a theologian. Why I was doing this was the truth that I had discovered in my research, and why is that not acceptable? So it was a faith commitment deep down in that regard. I'll say one other thing. I was invited to South Africa during this period, during this battle time, that summer. And the reason there was to update the priests and bishops in South Africa, Catholic priests and bishops, in the area of Christology. It's summer up here, but winter down there. So every winter they brought somebody down from summer to update, because they're so far away and had no Catholic universities in the country. So what I walked into in South Africa at that point was apartheid and a state of emergency. Nelson Mandela was still in prison, fear of civil war, tremendous oppression by the government. And so many of the priests and bishops I taught had been imprisoned because of their preaching or because of their advocacy for human rights, for African peoples, blacks especially. And I made such an internal identification of what was going on in the church with women, with what was going on in South Africa in terms of black people, that again, I was so encouraged by the witness of so many people I met there in the church, that again, it was a sense of justice and the importance of this for the overall goodness of the world, that stay in the struggle. And when the days I wanted to give it up, I thought of South African people so many times, and I thought, they haven't walked away for decades from this struggle, and I can just do my little bit,
Yeah, that's very powerful.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh wait, are you?
Yeah.
Well, first off, as one of the women in the academy now, I do want to thank you for continuing that fight, because I don't know where we would be at this point. But so that was kind of your tenure process. So does the struggle kind of continue for you? Do you feel like you're fighting battles as big as that, or bigger, or is it gotten easier? What do you think?
In some ways bigger, After one gets tenure, the general tendency of most universities is then you get your first sabbatical year or research leave. And I did receive that as a result of getting tenure. And my project was a simple book speaking about female images of God. So when I started to write it, the anger in me against patriarchy came out in such venom. It almost frightened me. I was so angry. And I thought, well, this isn't going to get anybody anywhere. It's like when you're angry in the classroom and you yell at the student, automatically as a teacher you have lost. You know what I mean? So I said, well, no, find another approach and so on. But what I did that whole year, and really it was the energy of the tenure battle and my anger as a result of it all, was I wrote She Who Is. That's how that came out. So when I would be petering out of energy, I would remember some of the things that happened. I go, whoop, back to the computer, another chapter. No, that's. But it went on like that. It fueled my energy to do theology in the way that hopefully would make a difference. That I could use arguments from scripture and tradition and women's experience today and lay something out that wasn't crazy, wasn't like, oh, they just could be dismissed, but had to be taken seriously within. If you take these sources seriously, then you need to look at this. And I think ever since, that's been the method that has come to me to do theology, is with that in mind. That has never gone away. Yeah. In a very interesting way, in 2011, the U.S. Catholic bishops criticized a book I wrote called Quest for the Living God, which was not a feminist book, just a small book putting out there what's happening in the theology of God globally once again. And that experience just brought back, of course, the tenure. I mean, these are bishops, criticizing you. And again, I think, what's going on here? There's nothing in this book that is, they kept saying, it's dangerous to the teaching of the church, And my response is, yes, if you think the church is essentially patriarchal, then it is dangerous. But fundamentally, it's not dangerous to the gospel. So that argument was, went on for over a year and was massively public. Much more than my tenure battle. And at the time of tenure, nobody even knew it was happening, except privately, But that was in the New York Times and on the web, because now we had the internet, so everything was very public. Yeah.
What did you have similar support systems to get you through that process as well?
Very much so, and a new support system which didn't exist in the previous, which was readers of my works. So literally, I received thousands of emails and letters, and I'm amazed that the Fordham system didn't break down with what came in by way of support from all over the world. My books have been translated to many languages, and so people just like, what? And then of course many people bought the book to see what the fuss was about, and they started forming book clubs to read the book, and so all of that was not in existence the first time around. It just it struck me interesting. It gave the book much more publicity and sales and exposure to the thinking that was in it that ever would have happened, if this criticism hadn't been mounted. So someone said to me, it's Sophia's way of getting the word out. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's one way of looking at it,
So I would say, thanks, bishops, and move on.
Right. And I've had older people come to me, older theologians, say, how can I get them to criticize one of my books? Because then people will read it, what I mean? It's like, and they're half joking, but on the other hand,
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's very interesting. I was, one of my exam questions was dealing with kind of tracing where you and Roger Haight both kind of got critiqued. So
right.
I've been digging through a lot of those, how you said the New York Times articles and all these things. So
right.
I could sense in one of them, there was like a quote from you, and I could sense you were just kind of like, I'm done. There's not a lot other than just this circular conversation happening.
Right. No, in the end, I cut it because I said it's sapping my energy and time. And I was onto this new research, which then finally came out in Ask the Beasts on an ecological theology. And I just didn't want to waste any more time. If there was a sincere effort to get at the truth, I'd stay at the table forever, but there wasn't. So I just thought, shake the dust off your feet, famous words, and get on with it, because what was great is that my position here was not in jeopardy at Fordham. I have tenure. This is not a pontifical university. It's governed by the state of New York and the laws of the United States about higher ed, academic freedom. The president came out very strongly in support of me. The faculty signed a letter in support. So there wasn't any danger of losing my position. That was one thing. And again, that's different from the tenure case, because I almost didn't have a position as a result of that. And the more it went on, the more people kept saying, this is a very good book in its own little way. It's not a creative book. It's just like reporting out, But anyway, it just struck me that the strengths that were in my world at that point for dealing with this were enormous. Yeah, were enormous. I've just mentioned one other thing at that point. A group of Lutheran women who had doctorates and were teaching signed a letter of support to me. The first round was 72 signatures, and in the second round it was over 90. But every one of them was doctor this, doctor from Iceland and Geneva and Australia and all over the United States. And the letter they wrote was so powerful and supportive. And as a group, they did this. I just treasure that, you know what I mean? It's just thinking of the fact that, yes, I am a Catholic, but the theology I was doing deliberately is wider than the Catholic. It's ecumenical, it's Christian. You try to draw from the best of the whole Christian tradition. And that just so acknowledged that, and I was just so heartfeltly moved by that. Yeah.
That's great. Did you need to?
Oh, sure.
All right. So, kind of moving into the research and things that are maybe empowering for you. So, what is your favorite part of doing research for a new book or your new interests?
I love research, and my favorite part of doing research for a new book is really scouting the bibliography. And I feel then like I'm a kid in a candy store, and I have all these wonderful things to be able to read and to discover what's there, and then figure out what I want to use from it and what thesis I want to propose. And I have never written a book that's ended up where I thought it would when I started. In other words, the research takes me to new insights and suggested a new kind of design for the book or a new outline and so on and so forth. So it's a really creative work, and it's full of discovery and delight. So I just enjoy it very much. Yeah.
What do you think are some of your maybe theological norms or things that undergird your research, things that you kind of always tie yourself back to, are important for you theologically?
By that you mean sources, or do you mean
either sources or an idea maybe that's picked up by multiple sources? Or we get a lot of questions as doctoral students about what are your norms? What are you going to go to bat for? So what are some of those things that drive you?
Oh, is this for the flourishing of women? Mm-hmm. That's fundamentally it, and everything else that becomes the test stone really, and that developed, as I said, through my own experience, through my experience of South Africa, and then my experience of public lecturing around the country and internationally. So many conversations with so many women in different circumstances. And it just hits me, if the theology the church is doing and the academy is doing isn't dealing with that public, then it's just more of an isolated, abstract endeavor. It's not without value, but it's not the kind of value I want it to have. So fundamentally, I think it's an ethical value that I'm looking for the benefit of those who are suffering in some way, that this could in some way help to relieve. Mm-hmm. Having said that, it's not only for women, because it's always we're in it, all of us together. So women, men, and all varieties of all of the above. What is good for the human being, and now I'm very much more focusing on the whole planet, all of life. Mm-hmm.
want to know what, through your process, has shifted you to that wider scope of the entire, all of creation.
Right. For years I was using a feminist hermeneutic as I was working, right? But all through those years I was reading Sally McFaig and conversing with Sally, and over and over again she would be like a nudge to me, you know. This it's like there's more than this, there's more than this. And my own love of the outdoors, as I mentioned when I was a kid, kept coming back to me. And then of course as the data starts rolling in on ecological disasters that we're living through, fundamentally I tell you what drove all of that combined, but it's the faith conviction again that if there is a God, this God is creator of everything and loves everything. And what are we leaving out? You know, men left out women, whites left out blacks, heteros left out LGBT, you know, and so humans are leaving out all the others. So it just, like drop in a pebble and then the circles keep rippling out. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where you go from here. I recently had an invitation from the Center for Theological Inquiry in Princeton. They are starting a 2-year project studying astrobiology, which NASA is saying we have found other worlds that could be conducive to life. So what will happen when and if we do discover life, not just on Mars, but like all the solar systems, astrobiology. So I guess it can go wider than just our own ecological planet. But I'm not myself, not there yet. That's not a question I have. It's a question for the future, and they want to work on it now so things will be in place when we do. And there's a value to that, but I'm still concentrating here.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So just to touch back, when you were first getting, published with, I know you published a little bit before She Who Is. I know you've got Considering Jesus and a couple others, but breaking into the publishing world, was that relatively easy? Did you just follow a certain track, or was it difficult?
It was relatively easy in that some of these wonderful mentors that I've mentioned introduced me to editors at the AAR and also at the CTSA, the Catholic Theological Society of America. And that has an annual meeting every year in June. And so you get to know, and it's the same editors, more or less. And the editors are always asking, what are you working on? Do you have a manuscript? I'd be interested in seeing it. And good acquisitions editors are always interested in new material. So I would say it was more personal relationships with editors was the beginning, and that got accomplished by introductions from colleagues, older colleagues. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you mentioned AAR, so I do want to, what was that story you had wanted to talk about?
Yes. Early on in the 80s, this is before I had tenure, so I was just, there was one AAR a study group that went for a few years on liberation theology. Mm-hmm. And Liddy Russell was one of the leaders of it. And this one session, she sat us all at tables of 8 or 10 and gave us, it was printed out, a passage from the book of Exodus, chapters 1 and part of 2. And then she told us to discuss what would a feminist hermeneutic of these passages entail. And I know our table, we worked at this and so on and so on. And finally come together, everyone reports. And nobody had it. Nobody had it at all. What it was the story of the liberation of the Israelites from slavery starts with the midwives. Chapter 1, Shifra and Puah. We even have their names. I've named my 2 cats after them, by the way. It's not Moses, the great man. I mean, the way the history is told, and Cecil B. DeMille's, it's the great man and he leads them out, But if it weren't for the midwives and his sister and his mother and the Pharaoh's daughter, who collaborated across age and race and class and ethnicity to let this little baby boy live, he would have been snuffed out as a child and not made it into adulthood. So it was the women's activity and initiative, even under threat for the midwives, that start. Well, by the time she finished explaining what Letty was, I was like blown away, and like this whole world opened up to me of these stories you've just taken for granted all your life that have this other meaning that's not even hidden. It's right in front of your eyes, but you weren't reading for it. That was so liberating. It was one of the most important lessons I've ever had. Just watching her exegete that passage with feminist hermeneutics, you know. Then she gave us a whole bunch of other things, and we're all trying very hard to be feminist in our interpretation, you know. Now this was before In Memory of Her came out, Elizabeth. So you have to say, like, way back at the beginning, you know. And the same year as In Memory of Her came out, Sexism and God Talk came out. So Elizabeth, Sophia Renza, Rosemary Radford Ruth at 1983. I was in my second year as a non-tenured professor. And of course they gave such strength and systematic analysis to this whole thing, both biblically and dogmatically, that began to factor into my own work as well.
That's great. It's always, I think, amazing to kind of track these trajectories of conversations, especially with feminist theology. Like, they were influencing you, and then, you know, the next generation, not even generation, but next,
Like,
just, you know,
couple
stage of
years,
students.
right.
Yeah, that's great. All right.
Phones.
There was one, the women's, like, collaboration of midwives that reminded me of, like, we were talking in the Krista community, like, yeah, well, see, you already got us spurred on to our next endeavors. All right, so we do want to then kind of focus on the future, you know, hopes and dreams and also fears. What do you feel like the immediate issue that theologians need to be addressing is?
Oh, gosh. I don't think I could answer that in all truth. What is the immediate? There is a pluralism of issues. And one of the strengths of theology, at least in this country, if you just say on the United States for now, that I think one of the strengths is there's such diversity. Because you do have theology being done by people of different ethnicities, African American, womanist, for example, Latino, a variety of interests. So you have the immigration question, you have the justice question, you have racial issues, gender issues. Fundamentally, I think we're all in a secular society, that even though we're supposed to be this big religious country, you know, secularity is certainly coming stronger and stronger. So it's the question of faith across the board for everyone, no matter what religion you're in. There's the interreligious question, of course. There's the Muslim issue. When I say issue, you know, are all Muslims terrorists? You know, thank God, no. But there's theology that needs to be done on this question by Christians in dialogue with Muslims and so on. So to boil it down to one, and then to say nothing of the economic disparities, the consumer culture that we're in, that, you know, you're successful if you have enough that you can buy more. There's a scale of things. And what I love is that, say, go to the AAR, it's all happening there, you know what I mean? And you can, I think it's incumbent upon everyone to sit down quietly and check in with your soul and say, like, what's my question? Where do I feel drawn? What's my issue? Because there's no one of us can do it all. And the strength is the community of scholars that's working on all this together in their various ways. And conflicting with one another. I mean, we don't all agree either. And I think that can be very healthy. Yeah.
All right, so what are some of your maybe fears for the future of either theology in general, the world in general, or even, you know, feminist theology?
Right. Let me take feminist theology and my fear for the future to begin with. Years ago, Rosemary Radford Ruth wrote a piece that she was afraid that if people didn't pick up feminist theology, it would die. And then a few generations from now, people would have to wake up and reinvent the wheel again. Just as second wave feminism had to pick up the pieces from 19th century first wave feminism. Like, you could read Sarah Grimke now and you go, hey, how come that wasn't passed on, you know? And Rosemary's point was, if we don't institutionalize feminist theology and pass it on to the next generation. That's going to happen again. And there was, when she was writing that back in the 80s, that was a genuine fear. And I took that seriously as a young faculty member myself, not to try to let that happen. I would say right now, that's one fear I do not have for the future. Because not only are enough people studying feminist theology, writing it, and so on, even people who don't consider themselves feminist theologians bring in the question, or bring in the issue, or use some of the research that's been shown to have an effect, and so on. So I see it beginning to pervade subtly theological discussion, as in fact it should. And I don't think it's going to die anytime soon. My own research for this anthology on Jesus Christ, just simply that one subject, it's bubbling all around the world. So I think this is something that we don't have to fear anymore, which is nice to be able to say. More than that, I mean, it's a blessing. It's something that's taking root, you know. But what do I fear? I'm not sure that I have any fears, in other words, about theology in the future of any kind. As long as we maintain robust locales where theology can be done, and I don't just mean universities and schools, but churches, you know, parishes, centers, even groups of individuals who are interested doing, people who are listening to grassroots ideas. I think maybe one reason why I don't have that fear so much is the internet, because there are blogs upon blogs now in religion. There's all kinds of things that are really very good on the internet. Now there's an awful lot of drivel, oh God, you know, and so one must be critical when you say, but like I've seen an article that somebody writes that's really good, get picked up and go around the world, and then everyone can have it that way electronically, whereas it used to be by paper, it wouldn't pass on, and so on and so on. So I think there's a strength that, I think we're developing perhaps a global conversation in theology, ecumenically and also interreligiously, that no one could conceive of a number of decades ago. And as long as you come into the conversation with a listening ear, wanting to learn from other people and not just being the famous stereotype of the ugly American, you know, like we have it all, we know it all, we can tell you, but listening to one another, hearing each other into speech, to use that wonderful phrase, I think it'll keep growing. And I think what gives me so much hope, I must confess, is my own doctoral students and the students I see here and the students I meet in a variety of contexts, including yourselves. You know, there's a call that's gone out. I see, really, if I may use faith language, this is the work of the Holy Spirit, is inviting people into this kind of ministry of doing theology. I say to my students, you know, you must have a calling, because you know you will never get rich. You know, you're not going to be one of the masters of the universe, you know, but you're going to have a very deeply enriching and satisfying life in pursuing this kind of thing, you know. And so to see the number of young people that are, both men and women, that are interested in doing this and do it, and do it so well. And then I look at the new books coming out from young scholars, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is good.
I'm glad that you're hopeful.
I am hopeful.
Yeah. So
Let me just,
looking back on your career thus far,
sorry.
what was your proudest moment so far? You can have multiple.
I can have multiple proud moments.
Yes. But maybe some highlights for you.
I would say the most deeply satisfying highlights are the things that happen on a regular basis throughout a year when you're teaching. And the interaction with students who really learned something or are excited by what they're discovering, that you're guiding them to discover, who come in with their own questions and so on. I guess I am an inveterate teacher, and I love that. experience when you see the light go on in someone's eyes, you know. Publicly, I maybe one of the most interesting things, highlights, is when I received the Graumeyer Award for She Who Is. That was back in 1993. It's given by the Louisville Presbyterian Seminary and University of Louisville once a year to the best book in religion. And they not only have a panel of scholars, but they have a panel, at least they did in my day, 12 laity who aren't theologians, like people in the pews. And it has to pass their judgment also, so it has to be readable. Mm-hmm. And She Who Is won that year. And I had to go to Louisville. I had to give a big lecture on the subject and then receive the award. The mayor was there. They set up tents the way they do for the Kentucky Derby parties, and it was very thrilling and very exciting. I think that was the first award that my writing ever did receive, and the fact that it was being recognized that way to me was so encouraging, and so saying, you know, I kept faith with my own question, that question of female images of God, and it developed into a Trinitarian theology, which I had not expected at the beginning, and into all kinds of other issues with regard to God-world relationship and feminism. And the fact that it was recognized that way publicly, with such acclaim and with such a huge monetary award too came with it, was just very exciting to me, and it was encouraging to say, you can do this, you know, you can go on and keep going.
Yeah. It's nice to be acknowledged. Okay, this is good.
And you know what else too? When I wrote She Who Is, I wouldn't say deliberately, it was just who I am as a Catholic, and very trained in the pattern of Thomas Aquinas philosophically. And there was no one else at the AAR in the feminist circles at that point doing that. Very few still, right? So I had to choose to go that route, and again, it was a question of my own integrity or own truth, or what I knew how to do. And if I could haul this tradition in this direction too, that would be another little step in the right direction. And the fact that this book is sort of unapologetically using Catholic sources, but the award was given by Presbyterians. I said to myself, there's something broader going on here across the board, that we are, it's not Catholic in the turned in on your navel sense, but more out to everyone, and conversing with the Christian tradition in general. That's what encouraged me about it, if you will. You know, choices I made were recognized. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we had kind of a question that we didn't include on here, but we were thinking of it, of if, you know, we do want this to be a film that we show in classrooms. So if you were, you're addressing either like an undergraduate who may be coming to feminist theology for the first time, what would you want them to come away with from feminist theology, or from reading one of your works, if, you know, they were reading a chapter from She Who Is or something?
Well, I would say if they were people who are reading, the undergraduates who are reading feminist theology for the first time, right? What I would want them to come away with is this sense of the tremendous potential that there is in women's experience and women's voices to illuminate the Christian faith and to bring hidden treasures out of it that we hadn't understood before, and to have a great ethical impact on the way women are treated. And women, you know, I keep saying in isolation, but with every other group that's not fully appreciated in their full humanity. So I would want the women to stand a little bit taller, and I would want the men to look upon them with greater respect. And I would want them to see each other more as a community of human beings together, rather than any kind of dominant-subordinate relationship, which is still so built into our culture. They have to be in self-question. What have they inherited? What have they learned? Both in family and culture and in religious traditions, and begin to get a hold of themselves of where they want to stand as human beings. That's what I hope they would take away.
Did you have any more questions you wanted to
Well,
ask?
so if, what would you say to a group of MDivs?
Oh, yes.
Like, so reading your work, seminarians, so maybe they're heading to pastoral ministry, maybe they're heading to scholarship. Like, what would you tell a class of MDivs?
Well, I would tell a class of MDivs the same thing, with the added encouragement that since they are going to be the pastoral ministers of the church and carry forward the healing love of Jesus Christ into the world of so much suffering, right? To be alert to these issues as they are cropping up in every kind of corner that you don't expect, and to know that the resources of the Christian tradition, I just speak for that tradition now, are rich enough and strong enough to be able to deal gracefully with these issues.
Great. So you're done with your question?
Yeah, I think we went through them. How much time we got?
Well, I was gonna see, is there a question we didn't ask you, or is there something you'd like to say that we didn't touch on?
I don't think so. We could just keep chatting for a long time because it's very interesting.
I know, we wanted to be mindful of time, but I mean,
Right.
we could just listen for.
But I
Hours.
think, no, you've covered enough, and you're going to edit this in with a
Yeah,
whole lot of
yeah,
other
yeah,
people,
yeah.
so I think that's going to be good.
I'm wondering if I could ask one more question.
Sure.
I don't know if I'll word it
Are the
right.
cameras rolling still?
Yes.
Okay.
Cameras are
Are you
rolling.
going to clap?
No, because let me see how I am on time on this one. Yeah, okay. And you can answer to Ashley, but I'll ask it.
Pretend like.
Has your relationship with the divine or with God or however you talk about that, have you seen, like, has it expanded as you've continued to do your studies and research and write? I don't know. And if so, how? Or
How her personal relationship is connected
Yeah.
to her academic.
or not even like just like, I know when I was engaging feminist theology, the thing about it that was really mind-blowing was just like suddenly I saw God in a whole different light, and that continues to happen for me. Like,
Right.
so I don't know if you've experienced something similar, or if, I don't know. I don't even know if that's something you're comfortable talking about.
No,
but-
sure it is.
and I know I'm not wording that right, but that's kind of what I'm interested in hearing.
Right. Yeah, my own relationship to the divine has in fact continued to expand as I've continued to do theology in these various different ways. I grew up with the idea of God the Father, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Was always a loving father, but still a father, it's fine. Feminist theology blew my mind in that regard. It's really why I wrote She Who Is, to explore that idea. And not just God as mother, but then the wider imagery of female possibilities in Scripture, but going beyond that, the vis-a-vis of myself as woman to God as female, again, that keeps expanding. But what I found as a result of that deconstruction of God the Father, is that the female images didn't satisfy either for very long. And so it was a deconstruction of the human images of God, if you will, and expansion to a broader mystical understanding of God, the cosmic idea, the infinite light, the love, more satisfying than human images, although I think in the Christian tradition we're always still going to use human images of some sort. And my sense, though, is the more we use, and that's my argument, the better. We use many, and then you realize they're all relative to one another. As long as they're all purveying in some way an aspect of the story of the gospel, then you can keep going with them. But yes, I have found the way I understand God and relate to God is much less focused on any personal image, much freer in that sense. And I have finally, I think, come across, by the grace of God, Luther's insight that we are saved by faith alone, and you don't have to do anything, and just let it carry you. And so I'm not seeking God anymore. I mean, been there, done that, and it's just like now just being carried forward in these theological investigations.
Beautiful.
Great stuff.
And
Is
I
that,
remember that was awesome. Yeah.
Is that what you?
Yeah,
is that
I'm
what's
so
happening to you
received
too?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's why I'm doing all this. Well, and I remembered a question we asked our other interviewees, but so we asked, what would you what would you say to undergrads? What would you say to MDivs? What would you say to Ashley and myself and other people that are
The doctoral program.
yeah, we want to be feminist theologians. We're working towards that goal. What would you say to
Poor
us?
souls.
So you want to be a feminist theologian? Well,
You're right. The for dummies version of it.
right. Yeah, I would just give you every kind of encouragement in the world and tell you it's worth it, tell you the road's going to be hard in ways you can't imagine yet. It's also going to be deeply enriching and satisfying to you and your relationships. And to encourage you to go forward because you are the future of this whole study. And what you do, and you're going to pass on to the next generation when this whole level of people that you're interviewing now are gone from this earth, you'll be carrying it on. It's like a heritage. It's just a treasure, and you're going to grow it by your own thoughts and your own experience, and that's going to become something even more wonderful going forward into the future for everyone. Yeah. Very challenging.
Well, I feel
Good.
encouraged.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I have.
Yeah, that sounds great. I do have one kind of. I brought my copy of Ask the Beast. I was wondering if you could sign
okay.
it for me because I was like, I had She Who Is and Ask the Beast, and I was like, oh, I can't decide which one to bring.